Saying yes can lead you into some interesting challenges. I had agreed to take on this client commission dresser, and from the photo she sent me, it looked like it was going to be a pretty easy enough job of just sanding down the timber top and painting a new color on the base. But when I began this makeover, I really wondered, why did I take this on? I'm going to be making over this client dresser that has quite a bit of damage. The client said that they spilt some nail polish, so I've got to sand and remove all this. So we're going to expose the timber top and hopefully reveal some nice timber underneath. And I'm going to scuff sand and give it a clean and make it a bit brighter and white, as the colouring, I'm sure, was white at some point, but is now quite yellowing and off colour. I believe this timber top to be oak, but as I'm not too sure, I'm starting on a 120 grit to make sure it's going smooth and gentle over the paint finish and not tearing into the timber straight away. It's come up quite nicely, so I might stick to that grit just to keep going and potentially hand sand the sides. Removing the top corner detailed was really difficult. I tried unscrewing it by hand with a Phillips head and then using the screwdriver, and none of this was working, so I thought to flip it on its side and just hopefully that this would work. And thankfully this angle seemed to allow the top of that curved lip detailing thing come out easily, so that made it a lot easier to sand that, as it was separate to the piece. If this hadn't have come undone, I probably would have had to hand sand this, as it would have been really difficult to get into that detailing and curves with my Festool. So very relieved I was able to remove that top detailing. Next we come to the fun part of these drawers. So when I first inspected this, I thought that these knobs were drilled in and that this back button detailing would actually reveal the screw hole, but unfortunately it did not. So I had to jimmy this out, and I first tried using a really narrow Phillips head just to get into the timber in between the drawer front. And then with that I could use my hammer and notch out and just slowly edge out the knob. And thankfully this seemed to work. With so much paint built up and chips and flakes, I needed to thoroughly scuff sand all over this dresser. So that meant going over all the drawer fronts, the sides, the back, and just removing all the really thick, old, crusty parts of the paint. To make sure that the natural oak on these drawer fronts didn't bleed through, I'm just priming this with a water-based primer. Ended up doing about 3 coats all over the base structure of this to make sure it was really covered. Whilst I was waiting for this primer to dry, I got to work in hand sanding all those corner lip details. This is a slow and steady task of just sanding bit by bit, edge by edge, using a 80 grit sandpaper and putting in a firm card in between that sandpaper to get into those really deep details. It's all this hand sanding that really made me regret taking this on. With all the priming now done, I can thankfully move on to the painting. Here I'm using a lovely cool white cord bone by Porter's Paint. To make it easier to apply, I stand the dresser up and on its back so it's easier to get into those Queen Anne leg details as well. Here's the dresser after a few weeks of work. So I've done 2 coats so far of the Bone Colour by Porter's Paint, and I'm thinking I'll do one more coat just to be sure, but really loving how it's looking so far. And then I'll check with the client if we're after any distressing details before staging. The client was happy to continue on with the distressing details, and she also selected these gorgeous glass textured knobs called Calypso from my shop, which I'll link down below. I'm using a 120 grit sandpaper to do the distressing details. Here's a side-by-side detail of how the distressing looks on one drawer front and next to it without it. It is really subtle, but I find that it adds a bit more depth and interest to a piece. And what's great about distressing is that if you find that you've over-distressed, you can always apply a bit more paint into the area and cover it up and either go again or leave it completely covered. So it's really great if you're a beginner painter and you're looking into starting with chalk paint. Distressing is a great technique to try because you can always paint over it if you're not liking how the distress feature looks. This is how it looks with the distressing. It's quite subtle, but it overall adds a really nice depth and dimension and a lot more character to the overall piece. So I'm just going to contact the client and see if she wants this timber to be a bit lighter before sealing, and if yes, I will give it a slight whitewash and then hemp oil, and then it'll be all done. The client was happy to continue the warm look of this timber, so I'm just applying hemp oil rather than a whitewash, and you can just see how much that timber is just popping. It's always my favourite part, is just seeing timber unearthed. Definitely worlds away of what it looked like before. That's such a shame to think this timber was hidden underneath all that paintwork. I'm applying wax inside the drawers just to make it easier to pull the drawers out, as our warm climate tends to make timber expand and contract, and if your piece is a bit old you can find that the drawers get a little bit stuck, so applying either wax or oil inside is a really good technique to help this move better. I actually lost track of how many hours this dresser took me. I think maybe in total it's between 6 to 7 hours. I did this over 4 weeks, as the amount of sanding that was required really ended up hurting my hands. So I think note to self is next time I see anything with a bit of beveling and those curves, just kind of factor that in, because that does take a lot more time to hand sand that if you don't have the tools, and I did not. So that was all done pretty labor intensively, but definitely worth the effort because the end result is absolutely spectacular. So without further ado, let's get to the reveal. You just never know where a yes is going to take you, and agreeing to take on this commission piece, though was hard work, it was so worth the effort because the end result is absolutely stunning. The client was thrilled with how it turned out and is now a forever keepsake. She was utterly stunned that that natural oak timber was hidden underneath all that paint. I don't know what the person was thinking before when they just painted it all in that sort of white, which turned into cream colour. It's a shame to think that was hidden, but it's now been restored to its natural glory, and I'm just so thrilled that I said yes, because this dresser now has a new lease of life and looks absolutely stunning. I want to say a massive thank you for everyone for watching and commenting. It's been an absolute joy sharing all these videos with you over the year, and I'm so excited to bring you so much more content next year. I've got a wedding to plan, I've got money to save, so there's going to be so many furniture flips coming your way, and I'm hoping to do more interior styling and design tips. Thanks again for all your support, and have a wonderful new year, and I'll see you in 2023.